You should visualize and feel the pressure, but you shouldn't stop there. You should continue visualizing yourself overcoming that and succeeding. When I first got started, I would have the instinct to punch people. I started in a female-dominated team. From the first time I stepped on the mat, I saw that women could lead and that women could be powerful and that women could teach men in this sport. It's all about how you handle those thoughts. It's not about whether they're present or not. We can't control if they show up. It's all about what we do with them.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Elvis Type Podcast. Your host, Travis. Today, I have a very special guest, and Rose Miller. Rosie or Rose? What do you like to go by?
Either one. Yeah.
Perfect. How you doing today?
I'm good. How about you? Thank you for having me.
I am fantastic. It's a decent day in the Pacific Northwest. It's just a little bit of overcast. It was raining the last couple of days, and my wife decided to pick this week to do more yard work, so that was always fun.
Nice.
So, hey, but let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Let's get a backstory of who you are and how you got into jiu-jitsu and everything.
Yeah. So let's see. My background is actually in competitive dance. So from the time I was like 3 years old, I was in dance, ballet, modern dance. But I was always fascinated by martial arts. It was always something that I wanted to do. So when I got into my late teens, I had become friends with some people who were into boxing, and I just asked them to basically teach me how to box. I felt like that was the lowest barrier to entry, right? When you've been doing something your whole life, it can feel kind of daunting to be a beginner again. And so this was my first opportunity to really be a beginner again, because all my hobbies I had been doing since I was very, very young. And so I first learned how to box, and I absolutely loved it. I felt like it was a type of expression I hadn't gotten before. And at this point in my life, like, it was so different from the dance world. Like in the dance world, it's choreographed first, and it's very much about like what you look like and what size you are, instead of really like what your body is doing, even though dancers do incredible things. And so it was this really radical like mindset shift for me to kind of tap more into like this aggressive side of me. And I think I had a lot of aggression to kind of let go of. And then around 23, I moved to San Diego, and I joined a gym, and a mixed martial arts gym called the Arena MMA. And I started boxing there. And I would always watch after class, the jiu-jitsu class that was happening on the other side of the gym. And there was just this girl who was there every day. She was a purple belt. She was the only girl in class. And I just thought she was so cool. And jiu-jitsu just seemed so scary to me. Like, I didn't understand it at all, but it made me want to understand it. So that's kind of where like my interest really peaked. It was also around the time that Ronda Rousey was coming up in the UFC and just dominating everyone. And I always knew it was happening when these people were on their feet. But when it got to the ground, I didn't know what was going on. And I wanted to know what was going on. I definitely wasn't that like UFC spectator that was like, stand them up. I was like, I want to understand it. And so long story short, eventually I just decided that it was something that I wanted to pursue. Some changes had happened at the gym. My boxing coach ended up passing away very unexpectedly. And I just used that as an opportunity to kind of seek out something new. And so I started jiu-jitsu, and it's pretty much I've been hooked since day one.
Were you that type of person that came from boxing and you're like, okay, well, I have an experience in striking, so I should be okay-ish when I step on the mats?
I don't think so. I think I knew that I would be okay with like contact, and I would be okay, quote unquote, fighting. I think boxing helped me with that, but I think I knew that jiu-jitsu was so different that I wasn't planning to rely on anything from boxing to get me through jiu-jitsu. I mean, when I first got started, I would have the instinct to punch people, and I would like, that's not what we're doing, you know? So yeah, I was definitely okay with like the energy, kind of that combative energy, but it's a very different energy in jiu-jitsu than boxing. Jiu-jitsu is much more creative and honestly more technical in some ways. I think I understand jiu-jitsu far better than I ever understood boxing as well. But yeah, I think I came in just ready to start something from scratch.
It's funny you mentioned that boxing in your eyes being the lowest barrier of entry into a combat martial art or sport, because I feel like people see that jujitsu in that way because you're not getting punched. Like, what in your mind made you think that, okay, I'll take getting punched in the face as the lowest barrier of entry?
Yeah, it was honestly just because I knew people who
Oh,
boxed.
okay.
So I didn't have to go far out of my comfort zone or far out of my circle. Like I had people that I trusted who were already doing that. In my hometown where I started boxing, there wasn't much jujitsu at the time. So
Mm.
this is like 15 years ago, maybe even more than that. So yeah, there wasn't a whole lot going on as far as jujitsu in Tallahassee, Florida back then. There were a couple small gyms now that I found, but yeah.
So, what was that experience like stepping on the mats for the first time? Were you how many females were how many women were in the class? Were you the only one? Were you able to roll with someone your size? Like, what was that whole experience like?
So I like to say that I have two different experiences stepping on the mat the first time. The first, very, very first time that I stepped on a jujitsu mat was at the arena. It was after a boxing class, and the jujitsu instructor just was like, "Rose, you're taking class today. You're always watching. You're taking class today." And I was not prepared. It was a no-gi class. I didn't even have like, I don't know. I was still in my boxing get up, you know? And I think that he was teaching something from butterfly guard. I had no idea what was going on. That whole class is a blur. I have no idea. I have no idea what happened that day. um, and I remember being like, wow, that was an experience. But I don't really count that as my first time because I wasn't really going in with any sort of intention of actually training jujitsu at that point in time. So when I really pursued jujitsu for myself, because it was something that I was ready to do, it was at Gracie South Bay with Leticia Hibiero. And at that time, she was doing 30-minute one-on-one sessions with pretty much anyone who wanted to join. She had just opened her academy not long before. So she was really trying to, get people in, is my understanding. And I remember just being completely enamored. I thought that she was the coolest woman I had ever met. She was like this tiny woman who is like, you just know she's powerful when you see her. And also just so welcoming, so kind. And I mean, she taught me super basic stuff, how to bridge, how to hip escape, how to break fall, right? And I just remember feeling so inspired and so excited to come back after that intro session. So I came back that night to train the night class. And at that time, I mean, she had one of the most dominant women teams in jujitsu. And so there were a ton of women
Oh, that's
there.
nice.
And yeah, and there were a handful of other white belt women there who were around my size. So when I started jujitsu, I had a very unique experience that I started in a female dominated team, a female led team. There was still a male's presence. Her husband and partner, Fabricio, was also there helping to run the gym. But from the first time I stepped on the mat, I saw that women could lead and that women could be powerful and that women could teach men in this sport, which I think is a very unique thing to see day one.
Yeah, and I've talked to plenty of people, and I think the general consensus is if you want to see how successful an academy is, look at their women in the academy, right? Like if
Mm-hmm.
there's a large woman following or women students in the academy, that it generally means it's going to be a very successful academy. Like we have maybe three or four in our class. Typically, in our morning class, the one I take, it's about half and half, and I
Mm-hmm.
love it, man, because I'm all for like women's. I'm still trying to get my wife to join. The other day, like a
Yeah.
couple weeks ago, she's like, "I think I might do jujitsu," and I was like, don't, hyperventilate. Like, don't get too excited. Don't make this weird. Don't make this weird. Because I'm like, you should do it. It's so much fun, and I feel. If people had more experience like yours, women had more experience like yours, like it'd be a totally different sport and a whole totally different like community because it's more welcoming in my eyes.
Yeah, and my thing too, where I really see an opportunity or a missed opportunity in a lot of gyms is having women lead co-ed classes. I always say that the best way to support women's jujitsu is to have women's leading co-eds classes, not only the women's classes. Like have a women's class, but let that be to help build confidence and transition them to the co-ed classes if they're not ready to jump right in there. And then the best way to make that transition feel accessible and welcoming to other women, especially women who maybe aren't there to compete. Maybe they're there to build confidence. Maybe they're there to work through past trauma. Who knows why they're there? But for some women, there needs to be kind of, transition to the co-ed classes that can feel kind of daunting. And I think a great way to do that is to have more female representation leading those classes.
How do you feel about all female classes? It's kind of like, all female like self-defense seminars, or I'm all for it. Like, I think it's a great, barrier or a way to get more women into it. But at the end of the day, I still feel like they should be kind of like herd. I don't want to say herded, but like pushed towards the co-ed class. You know what I mean? How do you feel about strictly women only classes?
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I think that they serve a purpose, but I don't think that should be the only place these women are encouraged to train. And so I teach a women's only class here in San Diego, and the only reason I accepted that class was because I said, if I teach this women's only class, I also want to teach co-ed classes. I also want these women to see that this space and these classes are for them too. Because there's no such thing as women's jujitsu.
Right.
It's just jujitsu. And one of the nice things about jujitsu is it's one of the only sports that we don't have that W in front of it, right? It's not the WNBA. It's not
Oh,
W
that's a good
jujitsu.
point.
It's just jujitsu. And I want to keep it like that, So I think it's really important that women go to the co-ed classes. I think it's super important to expose yourself to that and yeah, just let it be jujitsu.
You have a pretty extensive competition background, right? You mentioned like on your Instagram the other day, you suffered a couple concussions in a short period, so you unfortunately had to stop competing. What was it like for you competing?
Oh gosh. So yeah, it's been a trip. It took me a long time to learn how to compete. I'm a very competitive person naturally. I grew up competing in dance. I was always a very successful competitor in pretty much everything I became competitive in, whether it was dance or I used to compete in piano and music theory. Like anything that I
It's
did,
interesting.
I would seek out competition. Big nerd energy. Um, and so I've always sought out those types of challenges. But it wasn't until I competed in jujitsu that I was really confronted with the pain of loss and the way it hurts to lose in jujitsu. Because when you learn in jujitsu, it's you one on one with another person. And jujitsu was the thing that I lost the most at out of the gate. Like, I
Mm.
think I went a full year of like all white belt. I think I lost first or second round in everything. And um, it was really good for me, to be honest. Like, I had to learn how to lose. I had to learn how to learn. I think coming from like a weightlifting background and just kind of being a pretty physical person, I was really relying on my strength a lot instead of technique at the beginning. And I also wasn't giving justice to the impact of mindset when it came to competing and when it came to competing in jujitsu. And so it was a huge learning curve for me. That surprised me. I was the competitor that thought I'm going to win my first tournament for sure. No doubt in my mind. And it did not go that way. Cause I was the kid who I felt really confident in the training room and competing for me was totally different. Um, but it was also really good. So throughout blue belt, I was competing a lot at a lot of opens, started winning more, started losing some. And I think it was because I never felt super confident competing because I placed so much of my worth. Like, I'm good at jujitsu if I win, or I belong here if this. And there was always some contingent factor there. There was always something riding on it. And it really wasn't until I let that go and I started just competing for myself, competed out of curiosity, competed because I was excited to do jujitsu, that I really started finding success. So it was not straightforward for me. It took a lot of practice, struggle, losing before I felt like it finally clicked for me.
Real quick, this episode is brought to you by our Patreon and YouTube members. Thank you guys so much for committing $5 a month for exclusive and early content, and you get priority Q&A, and you will get secret live streams, and also you have the opportunity to get your roles reviewed by myself and a past guest or one of my high-level friends that can tell you what you're doing wrong, what your goals are, and where you should be focusing. Also, you are directly supporting the podcast and allowing me to keep improving and keeping my editor Dan. So thank you guys so much to my patrons and to the YouTube memberships. If you guys want to join for $5 a month, link is down below. Thank you so much. Back to the show. Peace. I've only competed once, and I'm sure if people are regular listeners of the show, they're tired of me talking about it. But I do plan on competing again. I think there's a competition coming up April, I think it is, April and May in our area. And I think I'm going to sign up for it again because I was, I realized after the first time competing, when people say, "Oh, it's just jujitsu. It's just you're just doing jujitsu," couldn't have been further from the truth. Like I was astonished how different it was. There were so many different stress factors coming into it. Like I didn't have a coach there. I didn't know how things worked. Like I didn't know that. Hey, I'm weighing in, and that means I'm basically ready to go. Like I'm about to go on the mat. I had no idea, right? So I weighed in, and I didn't, properly rehydrate. I didn't take any, high or like gummy bears or anything to get some of my blood sugar up. And I was just like sitting there. I was like, is that it? Like, does that mean like we're about to go on? And they're like, hey, all right, you guys, now you're let's go to mat number 5. And I was like, oh, we're going? Like, I had no idea. You know what I mean? And there was just a whole bunch of eye-opening experiences that next time I compete, I feel like I'm going to be much more mentally prepared. Like, I'm like, all right, now I understand how this works. Someone told me that I had to weigh in again right before I stepped on the mats. So I was like, I don't want to drink any water because I'm
Oh,
afraid
geez.
that I'm going to step on the scale, step on the mat, and I'm going to get disqualified because I'm going to be over. So I just didn't do anything. And
Oh, man.
now I know that's not true. So,
Yeah.
what was the biggest eye opener for you when you first competed for the first time?
So it's kind of funny because I had a friend, he was an upper belt. I think he was a purple or brown belt. I think he was a purple belt. And he's like, Rose, we're going to go to brunch. I'm going to walk you through everything. And I remember I'm sitting there. Keep in mind, my first tournament, I had only been training like 2 months. Okay.
Really?
I was just, I'm telling you, I had hubris. I was like, yes, of course, I'm going to win 2 months in. I was that kid. And so we go get coffee, and he's like, what's your game plan? I'm like, my what? And and then he's starting to walk me through like how to score points. I didn't even know how to score points. I didn't know what point scoring positions were. I didn't know what the weigh-in procedures were. There was so much I didn't know. I had gone to a tournament before. But I think I was most caught off guard by just kind of the adrenaline dump and not remembering anything that happened. It was like I walked on the mat and
blacked out.
Like immediate amnesia. So I was not expecting that. And because I had been used to performing, but not knowing what's coming next, even when you have trained however many times, I mean, there's this, and this is why I love competing too, is being able to operate under pressure, being able to operate under stress. It's so important. And so I think that was the biggest surprise. And I was absolutely hooked after that first competition.
Really?
Again, it was just this feeling of that did not go how I expected. I want to understand why. I want to understand how this works. If people have heard me on other podcasts, they'll know that my very first match ever was with like a yellow or orange belt who had been trained. She was a teenager or maybe like 11 or 12, who had been training for like 5 or 6 years. And I was a white belt adult woman who had been training for 2 months. And that, because I know a lot of guys have the experience of going to a gym and rolling with like a small female and getting destroyed. And I had a similar experience, only it was with like a preteen who had been training for 6 years. So that's what hooked me.
Yeah, I love that because when I had my it reminds me of the first time I had my first jujitsu class, and we rolled afterwards, and I got my butt kicked by like an 18-year-old one stripe white belt, right? And at the time, I was like super big into strength and conditioning. I was trying to compete in Olympic weightlifting, and so I had really decent numbers for lifting weights and stuff like that. And I just remember this kid was like half my size and half my age, and he's just whooped my tail, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it was, I don't ever want that to happen again. I need to figure out how to do this better. But for some
Mm-hmm.
people, that's the complete opposite of the way they handle it. They're like, I don't ever want to do this again. I don't ever want to be faced with this again. I don't ever want to be in this situation again. And I feel like competing is the same way. Some people will have that rude awakening of, oh, I'm not as good as I thought I was. Like,
Yeah.
and
Well, oh, go ahead.
no, no. And I was going to say, so how do you view stuff like that with when you work with athletes?
Well, I think the thing is I think the misconception is that people don't have those thoughts ever. When the reality is, like, even I have, like, leading up to competition, I'll be like, what the heck are you doing, Rose? Like, you're putting yourself through this again. You're going to sign up for the master's division next time. You're definitely signing up for the master's division. And I never do. I work through those thoughts, but it's not like, it's all about how you handle those thoughts. It's not about whether they're present or not. We can't control if they show up. It's all about what we do with them. Right. And so coaching people through not only listening to themselves, but talking to themselves, I think is super important. And you said something a few moments ago about, people say it's just going out there and doing jujitsu, but your first competition was far from that. But but the goal is for it to be just another day doing jujitsu, and that comes down to honestly figuring out how to not think. And so making things so automatic, being
Mm.
so comfortable in that environment that we aren't thinking about what we're going to do next or what will happen if, right? And so kind of getting to the space of neutrality or even positivity, not forced positivity, not being overconfident or forced confident, but just being so neutral under stress that we can just flow. And so we can't control the outcome. We can't control what the ref sees. We can't control what our opponent does, but we can control our thoughts. We can have the goal of having our best performance ever. We can control what we do in the bullpen, how we control our thoughts. We can control all of those things. And that's really what we want to focus on. There's research that shows that affirmative talk, I trust myself, I have an answer for anything that's going to happen, leads to much better performance outcomes than instructional thought. And I think a lot of people, before they step on the mat to compete, are thinking, if they do this, I'm going to do this. Or, okay, I'm going to pull, and then I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to, they're thinking step by step when you have no idea what's going to happen. Right.
Hmm.
And so I think making that shift is really huge.
That's so interesting because I'm guilty, and I will say that I've told people they need to visualize their competition. They need to visualize their roles and how to do X, Y, and Z if they do X, Y, and Z or whatever. You know what I mean?
Well, that's actually great advice. You should visualize it. And so visualize what you want to do, but don't only visualize it happening perfectly. You should visualize and feel the pressure. You should visualize and feel the resistance, but you shouldn't stop there. You should continue visualizing yourself overcoming that and succeeding. And if something goes wrong, say you lose a match, I want you to replay that match, but correct your mistakes so that you're visualizing yourself doing it correctly. So visualization is huge. But I think where people make the mistake is they either visualize themselves doing it flawlessly without resistance. And it's never going to happen like that. So then when you feel the resistance and you feel your heart rate rise and you have the thoughts of, if I can do this, they never visualize themselves going through that. And you absolutely have to, because that's what's going to happen. And then the other thing is, if people lose, they tend to replay their loss exactly how it happened. And so then you're just getting reps of seeing yourself fail. But you have the answer for that. Maybe you didn't do it when you needed to, but you will do it next time and you know how. And so I want you to visualize yourself correcting that over and over and over again. Mental reps really, really matter. And then visualize other things. Visualize yourself getting your hand raised. Visualize yourself on the top of the podium. Do all of that. but also visualize the pressure and visualize yourself overcoming it.
No, I think that's great. And I think one thing that helps or that kind of hurt me though in my first competition, I would love to get your opinion on this, is I didn't have a coach there, which didn't necessarily I've never that was my first competing, right? So I don't know what it's like to have a coach there versus not have a coach there. So I just only have this one experience. But one thing I did was I felt like I was paying attention more to my opponent's coaches and what the coach was telling
Mm.
them to do rather than trying to develop my game and work on things that I wanted to do. I felt like as if I was just trying to stop them from advancing instead of trying to advance myself. How do you work with your athletes to not have that dichotomy of either I focus on what they're supposed to be doing and not try to advance, or I try to advance and just ignore what their coach is saying? Because I think there is
Yeah.
power in both, but it has to be a
Hmm.
balance.
Yeah. Well, first of all, props for you actually being able to hear anything that was being said off the mat.
It
Like
felt really
some
quiet
people,
besides his coach, I'm going to say.
that's incredible, to be honest. I mean, I was going to say, who knows, even if you had your coach there, some people don't even hear their coach. Some people don't even they hear their coach, but they can't make their body do the thing. So having a coach is sometimes hit or miss. I think it's awesome to have that support and have someone in your corner and know someone's there for you. But it's kind of a skill in itself to remember, oh, hey, I'm supposed to be like listening and doing this. Your coach is kind of like the eyes seeing the whole situation from the outside. And it can be hugely helpful if you can hear them, if you can recognize their voice and do it. But for your question, I'm very much a like, impose your game. Make any one of their attacks an attack for yourself. So I'm very much about not worrying so much about what your opponent is doing and knowing where you want to be and being able to find it from anywhere. And so sometimes with like my coaching with jiu-jitsu athletes, a lot of them will send me footage, whether it's of training or of competitions. We'll talk about stuff that they are running into, and I will give them specific training intentions for that week. And so like I had one girl who would come up on top and she was really confident sweeping, but then she would get up on top and freeze. And she sent me competition footage of her just like hesitating because she was worried about what her opponent was going to do. She didn't feel as confident when she felt like someone could get underneath her. And so she would get in these really, really good positions and then just stop. And so, excuse my language, I created an intention for her training called fuck around and find out. And I told her, I don't care if you lose every round in training this week. All I want you to do is you cannot stay in the same position for more than 3 seconds.
Mm.
If you count to 3 in your head and you're still in the same position, you have to move whether or not you make the right decision or not. You know? And so this got her to really trust herself and trust her instincts and see which ones like worked and which didn't. And it ended up being way better than she realized. But so much of the time it's building that trust that we do have the answer no matter what happens.
Yeah, and I have this issue too when I roll, especially with upper belts. Certain upper belts, um, where I feel like I'll get in advantageous positions, and then I start going through this. Oh, did they let me get here? Are they letting me work? What are they about to do? And I kind of like psych myself out. And in even when I roll with like my peers, like other blue belts or purple belts and stuff like that, I'll be like, oh man, how did I get here? That felt way too easy or whatever. And I have like this internal dialogue, and next thing you know, I'm getting submitted, or next thing you know, I'm like losing the position, or I don't go for that submission. I don't finish that submission because I'm like so afraid of, I don't know, like the false sense of accomplishment that's going to come with it
Mm,
afterwards. You know what I mean? Like, did I actually earn that? No matter who it is, I don't know what it is about me that does that.
yeah. I've experienced that before too, where I get to a really good position on, especially when I was like a blue belt and I first got to Atos and I'm like rolling with like all these phenomenal athletes. Like about to take someone's back, like I'm not supposed to be
Yeah.
here, you know? Um, so it's real and you're not alone in that experience. And I think it like you really should push yourself to push through those thoughts and just even if you get to an advantageous position, even if you submit a higher rank, like it's just another day on the mat. Just like if you were to get submitted too, there's no what should happen. Who knows? Who cares if they're working on something else? They didn't let you get there unless they were trying to work a specific escape, in which case, no matter what you do, it doesn't really matter. So I think it's part of it is just like not taking it so seriously,
Mm.
you know, man, I get submitted, they get submitted. I'm going to be in a bad position. They're going to be in a bad position. Who cares? We're training, and just really allowing yourself to be yourself on the mat. And I think it's interesting too that you recognize that you start thinking in those moments. And when we start thinking, we slow down.
Yeah.
When we start thinking, we stop ourselves. When we like action is unconscious. And so when we start thinking, our body isn't going to move as fast. It's not going to be as fluid, and we're just going to stop ourselves. So really trying to if you notice those thoughts coming, just trying to get back in your body and being present in that position, no matter who it's with. It's not disrespectful. It's not disrespectful to do well with a higher belt.
How do you work with your athletes on the building confidence in the training room that translates over to competition? Because as you mentioned, and many other people that probably listen to the show, they feel great in the training room, but then when they step on the competition mat, they have, they're like, oh man, this guy's really good. Like he's kicking my butt. And there could be, this internal struggle of that could go back to the training room. That's like, hey, I'm not that good. Like how am I doing so good in here? But when I go compete, I get obliterated.
Yeah. So I think it's a little bit different for everyone. Whoops. I don't know what happened. Is it okay if okay, we're back. We're back with the lights. That was weird. But honestly, I think the confidence thing is a little bit different for everyone. So it kind of depends on where this person is coming from. But I will say, I think a lot of people think confidence has to be earned. I think a lot of people think confidence comes from a result. I think a lot of people think confidence is universal, when really that couldn't be further from the truth. Confidence is developed. Confidence is often skill and circumstance specific. Confidence is something that we learn. It's a belief that hard work is going to pay off. If confidence was a result, if confidence had to be earned through winning a tournament, we wouldn't see underdogs win, you know? If confidence, a lot of people also think success automatically builds confidence, but it doesn't. Sometimes success becomes pressure. And then we see these high level athletes cave under pressure because they think something is expected of them. So confidence isn't so black and white. And I think that's first and foremost, the most important thing people should know is there's a lot of myths that we learn about confidence that just aren't true. And so confidence is a practice. We put so much attention into our jiu-jitsu technique. We put so much attention maybe into strength and conditioning or nutrition to be in peak physical shape. But you also have to put that same intention and attention to your mindset, because it is something that is learned. It is something that's developed, and it's something that needs to be nourished. Just because you become confident in one area doesn't mean you're going to become confident in all areas. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're going to stay confident. Right. And so it's truly is something that you have to practice. So I have a lot of exercises that I do with people depending on their specific, trigger or circumstance or the way doubt shows up. Right.
Yeah, I talked to Heisam Rita after he submitted Cyborg in the last ADCC. I talked to him like 2 weeks afterwards and got his how it felt and everything like that, because obviously that was like the biggest upset of the last ADCC. And one thing he mentioned was after he beat Cyborg and just had like this incredible history moment in jiu-jitsu, that he went into his next matches overconfident and he could do anything, like he was unbeatable, and ended up losing his next match because he was very real. He's like, I got in the mindset of and just took myself out of where I was in that Cyborg one, and it ruined me. How do athletes keep their head in, the blinders on, head in the moment, and not let their last success dictate their future matches?
Yeah, that's a great question. So oftentimes people will either be really prepared for their first match and feel really grounded because the first match is usually mentally the hardest, or it's built up to be mentally the hardest. And then I know once I get through that, I'm warmed up and I'm ready to go. But the thing is, there can be mindset shifts that happen, oh shoot, now I'm in semis, now I'm in finals, now this one matters a lot, right? And so we have different routines. I call it a mindset toolbox in competition to kind of ground people and bring them back to this kind of neutral space. And so it comes down to a lot of mantras, breathing techniques, just things to remind ourselves to be in this present moment. And I like that you mentioned overconfidence. I hate that term. I absolutely hate that term. I don't think people lose because of overconfidence. Overconfidence isn't a belief that you can just like run through people and that it's not going to be hard. And I think that's how people use it, right? I became overconfident. And so I forgot that I had to work hard in this next match too. It's when people use overconfidence, I think they're really referring to being taken out of the present moment, being taken past the work that they still have to do, right? And forgetting, oh, wait, I still have 2 more matches. I still have to show up again. And it's that confidence and belief that I can show up the exact same way I did in that cyborg match for my next 2 matches. That is confidence, right? And so the reason I bring that up is because I think a lot of people are hesitant to develop self-belief and develop strong confidence because they're like, I don't want to be overconfident.
Yeah, I
I
hear
don't
that
want
a
to be
lot.
cocky. I
Yeah.
don't, and it's like, no, like first let's let that be a problem first before we start worrying about it. Let's let that be an issue, you know? And so much of it is like true confidence is that groundedness, that presence, and that belief that, no matter what happens, you're going to have an answer, that hard work pays off. So it's not disregard for your opponents. It's not jumping ahead of the present moment. It's being completely in the present moment.
What do you think is harder to correct? Having someone with an underwhelming self-confidence or I don't want to say overconfident because you just said you hate that, but like too much confidence, like a little on the air of little egotistical, a little cocky. Like which one do you find harder
Yeah.
to work with?
Honestly, I can't say that I've ever really worked with someone who was really on the cocky side of things. Um, and I think that might depend on the individual, but I don't know. I like to think that getting people to believe in themselves, it might take time, but I think with the right guidance, it's not hard to do. Um, and I don't know. I think maybe it might be harder to work with someone who's jumping ahead of themselves a little too much. But I don't know. I've never really experienced that, to be honest. I'm mostly building people up.
Yeah. So you also do strength conditioning and nutrition for athletes too. What does
Mm-hmm.
the strength conditioning look like leading up to a competition? Are they cycling on and off with supplements? Or, well, that sounds really bad.
I don't do any of that. I don't do
I was
any of
like,
that.
that's
I'm not
not
that
that.
kind of
I
coach.
was thinking like in my head like creatine or something like that, like protein, but
Yeah.
that came out completely wrong. Anyways, so, like, are they? What's the word I'm looking for?
Like
Yeah, like
peaking and
peaking. I can't believe I'm.
deloading
Yeah,
and stuff like
deloading.
that.
That's the word I'm looking. Oh my gosh, I can't
I
believe
got you.
strength and
I got
conditioning
you.
background. I forgot the word deloading. Are they deloading
All
6
good.
weeks out, 8 weeks out? Like, what does their strength and conditioning look like?
So again, it depends. So a lot of my answers are going to be it depends. So let's say I have a recreational athlete who is doing this because they love it, and maybe they compete 2 or 3 times a year, right? It's not like they're competing every weekend. Yeah, we're probably going to taper. We're probably going to let them recover a little bit and try to like peak their performance for the competition, no matter how quote unquote big or small the competition is. And by the way, I also hate using terms big and small for tournaments. Competition is a competition is a competition, and we should just think of them all like that instead of putting pressure around them,
That's a
right?
great idea.
So if you're not competing frequently, then yeah, why not? Let's let you have that full experience, right? Now, if I have someone who is competing multiple times in a month, competes at all the majors in addition to, doing super fights and, just competing very, very often. If we deloaded and tapered for every single competition, this person would never be like actually making progress in the gym, right? And so with those types of people, we're going to prioritize a few competitions throughout the year to really peak for, and the rest are part of training camp. So
What about nutrition? I know there's for some reason it's probably not as prominent anymore now, but there's this whole idea of carbohydrates within jiu-jitsu, and you're not supposed to. I think it's probably the Gracies back in the day, like you don't want to eat carbohydrates because X, Y, and Z or whatever. How do you navigate these misconceptions about nutrition with some of these athletes, especially if they've probably been doing jiu-jitsu for a while and they might have this dogma mentality about nutrition?
I run into this a lot. Carbohydrates are so important for athletes, and even things that we would consider quote unquote bad, right? I've heard instructors say, don't have sugar after training. And I'm like, no, actually,
Do,
please
yes.
go
You
have,
actually should,
please
yes.
have sugar. Yeah. Especially if we're talking about professional athletes who are training multiple times a day and like hard training sessions, right? Like, please go eat some gummy bears. Um, and so a lot of it comes down to education, and really just taking the time to explain why. It gets through to some people. It won't get through to everyone, but I am big on educating people on why we're doing what we're doing. I like to say I'm not a drill sergeant. I'm not your boss. I'm here to like collaborate with my clients and guide them through this experience. And especially with kind of my more gen pop recreational people, eventually I want them to have the confidence to do this on their own. I don't want them to need me forever. I want them to know how to fuel themselves, know why they fuel themselves this way, and feel confident doing so.
How do you feel about one thing that my wife comes from, like a bodybuilding background, and they do carb cycling and then purposeful carbohydrate loading before big workouts and stuff like that, and then cutting carbohydrates down on rest days. Is that something that you look at too when you work with certain athletes?
Not really, to be honest. Most people don't need it that in depth. Um, I try to keep my athletes' carbs as high as possible, as long as possible, and cutting them is like absolute last thing. And honestly, if we get to the point where we have to cut carbs, unless we have like 24 hours to refeed, I'm going to recommend we don't do that weight cut if that's what's required. There's other ways to go about it. The only time I really get into nutrient timing or meal timing or, carb cycling or whatever is if I have someone who's training at high intensities multiple times a day and is in a caloric deficit. Then we're going to have to be a little bit more particular with what we're eating and when. But if I have someone at maintenance, if I have someone who's just looking to boost performance, we don't need to worry about that in most cases.
So you mentioned something in there that's a hot topic, especially with hobbyists, and we talked about it real quick before. Weight cutting. How do you feel about weight cutting in jiu-jitsu?
I used to be an absolute no. I used to I used to say, don't do it. It's not worth it. Um, Now my mind has opened a little bit and it's much more nuanced than that. I think most people don't need to cut weight in jujitsu, especially if this is not your livelihood, especially if you are a lower belt. If you are like a white, blue, or even purple belt, like focus on your jujitsu, you know, focus on your jujitsu. A weight cut probably isn't going to make or break it, and it's going to shift your focus to the wrong thing as you're preparing. Develop good jujitsu. Focus on developing good jujitsu. And honestly, like 10 pounds really isn't going to make that big of a difference. Um, Now, I think it's important to know that there's a difference between weight cutting and weight loss. If you want to lose weight for health reasons, performance reasons, shoot, even aesthetic reasons, if you just want to look different, I am all about helping people do that, but don't put the deadline and the pressure of a tournament to do that. Maybe you're thinking long term, I want to compete in this different weight class. Okay, let's do it slowly. Let's do it the right way, and compete where you're at for as long as you're there and adjust weight classes when it's time, right? So I think this distinction between weight loss and weight cutting is super important. I think also knowing the difference, this is a whole different tangent that I won't go completely on, but I think knowing the difference between like in the fitness industry, we are constantly shown these like shredded people who are like, work with me, be your best self. And I am so opposed to that. Like, your leanest self is not your best self. Your leanest self is probably not even your healthiest self. So I think we really have to have a more realistic understanding of what a healthy body composition looks like, what a good performance-based body composition looks like. And if you still want to cut down leaner than that, cool. As long as you know that you don't have to be super shredded to be healthy or to perform well. And then we have guys who are taking special supplements who are able to maintain a very lean physique and keep their testosterone levels at healthy levels, when people who aren't, you know, taking stuff, they're not going to be able to achieve that same level of leanness and maintain healthy testosterone levels. So I think it's really important to also know that there's so many different types of situations when it comes to weight loss and weight cutting. So that was a tangent. Sorry about
No, because
that.
I wanted to talk about that because they're definitely, we see the biggest athletes in jiu-jitsu. Not only are they amazing at jiu-jitsu and everything like that, but a lot of them are absolutely shredded. They're complete units, and it could be in the average person's mind of like, why would I compete if that's who I'm going to go against? When it's like, that's not the average person. Like, you shouldn't even worry about those guys at the highest level because, like you mentioned, like, they have extra help. They have much more money on the line in order for them to, have every advantage as possible. How do you run into that with your athletes now? If they're like, they have this idea that they have to be, you know, look like a bodybuilder stepping on stage in order to be a good jujitsu athlete?
Yeah, I do. I do run into that sometimes. And I just have to be real about, well, first of all, some people are training so much that it's actually hard for them to eat enough to put on body fat. Like, lots of these professional athletes are training at high intensities quite a bit, and then they're teaching and they're extremely active. And so it's like, yeah, sure, if you want to match that level of activity, and if you can recover like these professional athletes are able to recover, then sure. But there's a lot of comparing apples and oranges instead of realizing like, I can't compare myself to someone who's doing this full time at a professional level if I'm not there. And that's okay. You can still like get so much out of competing. You can still be a phenomenal competitor in jujitsu and get so much out of that experience, even if your experience doesn't look like all these other people. And I think finding a way to make it work for you with your lifestyle is the key to making competing fun. If you are constantly trying to do something that is just unrealistic or unsustainable for your life, it's going to be miserable. But if you realize, okay, these are the sacrifices I'm willing to make. This is my bandwidth. This is how well I can train. This is how well I can recover. What can I accomplish within these boundaries? Then you're going to have a great time, right? It's just when we try to live according to someone else's boundaries and someone else's goals and someone else's, parameters, that we get into that comparison game and it becomes not fun anymore.
That it's interesting you mentioned that because as someone that trains at one of the biggest schools in competitive jiu-jitsu, Atos, do you ever feel, or when you first got there and you first started competing under that school, did you feel like a sense of I have to do good because of the school I go to?
I think so. And I think I felt like people I was competing against would look at me and see Atos on my back and be like, oh, I'm coming for her or something, And I really had to let that go. I talk a lot about, I think for a long time in jujitsu and in my competitive experience, I spent a lot of time trying to be like other people, um, trying to be like how my training partners trained and competed. And I would hear some people say like, I like to compete angry. And I'd be like, all right, I'm going to get angry. Like, look at me.
Her.
I'm not when I try to look angry, I look like I'm a frustrated toddler. Like, I can't pull off that look, And so competing in jujitsu was a great opportunity for me to actually really get to know myself. And there was a period of time, kind of during COVID, I was a purple belt. I had to take some time off the mats for a few months, and due to health reasons. And I was in the worst shape of my life. I was depressed. I was not in a good place mentally or physically or spiritually or anyly. And I was like, I need a goal. I need a goal. I had just gotten my purple belt. It's 2021, I believe. And I'm like, I'm going to sign up for nationals. Haven't really been training, out of shape, but I need something. And I need to not care what happens if I win or I lose. Because if I sign up for nationals now, when I'm at my lowest, I have nothing to lose. No one expects me to win. I just got my purple belt. I'm out of shape. I'm in two weight classes up. This is great, you know? So I was like almost giving myself permission to lose. I wasn't expecting to lose, but I gave myself permission to lose, which is kind of counterintuitive. And I remember waking up that morning, and I was actually working with a mindset coach at the time. And I texted her and I said, I am just so excited to do jujitsu today. I love all of my opponents. I am so grateful for them. I feel happy. I am just competing out of love. And I'm so glad these girls are here to let me do this, because I really feel like this is something I need. And it was the first time I had competed like that. It was the first time that I let myself be happy and excited to be there and experience the nerves, but also just feel like, you know what? I'm okay with whatever happens. It's going to be okay. And let me tell you, I stepped on the mat in my first match and I almost got submitted like 3 times. And in my head, in that moment, I was like, what were you thinking? Like, you're not supposed to be here. What were you thinking? And then I remember looking up at the clock and seeing she only had 1 advantage on me. And I had 2 minutes left. And I remember thinking, all you have to do is score, Rose. All you have to do is score. You're supposed to be here. And that shift in self-talk, I won that match. I won the tournament. And it was the first time it really clicked with, this is what it's supposed to feel like. It felt like I was competing, not a version of myself, not what I thought other people were supposed to be. And I think competing enough to have that experience where you find that it feels right for you takes time, it takes reps, but it's so important.
You did so you weren't a purple belt for very very long then, were you?
No, I wasn't. I was a blue belt forever, but I was only a purple belt for 2 years.
How long were you a blue belt?
Like five
That's where
years
I'm
or
at
six
now. I'm right there
years.
with you.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I was a blue
oh
belt forever.
man. Soon
But
someone's gonna
it's
think this is
good.
a super dark or a super light black belt one of these days. Like how bad it is.
Yeah. Well, I got to the point in my blue belt where I was embarrassed to tell people how long I had been a blue
I'm
belt, because I
getting
was
there.
like, they're going to think I suck. Like, they're going to think I suck so bad. But you know what? It's great. It really taught me that belts don't matter. It was fun for me to be a blue belt because I was able to like surprise people. They'd be like, what color? What color is your belt?
Yeah, I talked to
So,
Mike Bidwell. He's the BJJ over 40 guy over on Instagram, and he was a brown belt for 7 years.
that's crazy.
7 years.
That's almost unheard
Yeah,
of.
and then Lawrence Pachter of Hyperfly was a purple belt for 8 years. And so when I hear these
Hmm.
people have, these belts for such a long time, it doesn't make me feel better because I had, I wouldn't say higher expectations for myself to already have my purple belt, but I definitely didn't think I would have a blue belt this long. But that's also because, like you mentioned, my life is different. Like I have kids, I have a wife, I have a full time job. I'm not 25 years old anymore. I can't train all the time, and so
Yeah.
sometimes I just have to give myself that grace that I still get to learn jujitsu. I'm still grateful I get to go to class and be around like-minded people. And whether I get submitted the entire class or whether I have a good class, I should just be grateful that I'm there and, grateful for my health and everything like that as well. And when I competed, I just had that kind of mindset too of like, hey man, like I'm just happy I'm here. I'm happy I'm able to do this. Whatever the obviously I want to win, right? But it's like if I
Hmm.
if I don't win, it's okay. Like I have to give myself grace knowing I talk about hats. I wear so many hats in my life. I have like my podcast hat, my dad hat, husband, friend, all that stuff. And sometimes I have to
Yeah.
put different hats on and be okay with not wearing the one that I really want to at that moment. And ever since I kind of shifted that mindset, accepting things in my journey has been a lot easier for me.
It's huge. It's huge. I had to do the same thing. I kind of got to this place after COVID where I was like, you know what? I had been like living in vans, living in my car, living in laundry rooms, living in fighter houses, just so I could live as cheaply as possible and train as much as possible.
Atos, is that expensive?
And
No.
yeah, right. In
Yeah.
San Diego
Yeah.
is expensive. And I kind of got to this place and kind of the health stuff and the stuff that kind of set me back right before nationals that year, was kind of an impetus for me to make some changes too. And I finally recognized like, hey, I want more for myself. I love jujitsu, but I don't only love jujitsu. And I wanted to see what I could do investing in other areas of my life too. Like, what does it look like if I actually create a career for myself, create a life for myself, and still prioritize jujitsu and still give my all to it? But actually create a good life for myself. And everything improved when I did that. I also think like the guys who are at belts for a super long time, or, you know, maybe they've been training 20, 30 years and then they get their black belt. I think it's so underestimated to talk about those people because we always are impressed by the person who like got their black belt in 5 years or 6 years, right? It is super impressive, but it's equally as impressive when you see someone who didn't give up for years and years and years and years being stuck at a belt or only being able to train inconsistently or having to take time off because whatever the case is, and they stuck with it. You know, that's a different type of impressive. And I think that it's like, that's a true testament of patience and dedication. Like, it's easy to see yourself progressing at a fast pace and stick with it. It's hard to feel like you're going through years without making any progress and still stick with it, you know?
Absolutely. When you work with the athletes you work with, when they go on, let's say, like losing streaks, or they don't perform as well as they want to, and they hit plateaus or have blue belt blues or whatever it is, how do you coach them through that? Like, because it can be very hard for some people, and it can be discouraging if they lose 3-4 tournaments in a row, or whatever it is. Like, how do you redirect them to keep their eyes on their goals?
Yeah, I think losing is a very important skill to have, to be honest. So, I mean, the first reframe is that this is actually a positive in the long run, especially if you are still in your colored belts. I like to think of colored belt competitions as just training camps for the higher levels. And just kind of like we say, we want to lose in training, not in competition. We'd rather lose in lower belts than in higher belts, right? And kind of develop that
Yeah.
awareness and those skills along the way. So the first thing is a reframe that this is actually going to be positive in the long run, that we are learning a lot in these moments. I think the second thing is kind of back to confidence, that a lot of people think success necessarily develops confidence and that failure necessarily um, diminishes confidence. But that's also not true. If we are able to make the proper reframes and edit it and see what we can improve, and continue to build that confidence off the mat and bring it on the mat. It's just reps of getting there. And so you really can't let failure stop you. You can only let failure educate you.
No, that's great. I think when you understand how Henry Gracie said, he was so successful at jujitsu not because of all of his, his body type and his family name and stuff like that. He, one of the things he attributes it to is because he's failed so many times, and he just kept coming back to it. And I know sometimes when I leave class and I feel like I was the nail the entire time, it's so like, man, what am I doing
Yeah.
this for?
Yeah. And I mean, especially in a sport like jujitsu, where if you think about it, let's say we go to something like Pans that's happening this weekend. Half the people who signed up are losing first round.
Yeah.
Half the people who signed up, you know? And so like, you're not special. You're not particularly bad if you lose. Like, most people lose. And so you can't like hold that over yourself. You have to give yourself grace. You have to give yourself room to grow and evolve. It's very rare that someone has like a winning streak, like Tainan, for example. Most people lose more often than they win, or about equal, even people at a super high level. And so you have to give yourself grace. You have to let go of the fear of losing, you have to be more curious about, hey, if I give it all right now, let's see if I win with that. Right. And that's a hard thing to do because you have to be willing to lose. You have to be willing to give it all in pursuit of that win. And a lot of people let their fear of losing hold them back from giving their all, because if you give your all, then you don't have the excuse of, I just didn't pull the trigger, you know. I just didn't show up as myself today. No, you have to show up 100% as yourself and be willing to risk saying, I gave everything I had and it still wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And that's a hard pill to swallow, but you have to be able to do that.
Yeah, Jordan Robbie, he's a brown belt over at Autos.
I know
Yeah, yeah,
Jordan.
good guy.
Yeah.
When I interviewed him, he mentioned, he's like, people always say, you don't lose, you win or you learn. He's like, and that is true. He's like, you do lose, you have to learn to accept the loss. He's like, but you do have to look at it as a learning experience, because then that's how you improve. Like earlier you mentioned, you replay these failures in your mind over and over again. And I think you pointed out something great that I got to start thinking about too. And instead of replaying the failure, replay it as, what could I have done? What can I do
Replay
next
the
time?
opportunity.
Yeah.
Replay the opportunity. Replay yourself doing it correctly, and get those reps of you do. And let me tell you, like, you will start to see yourself in that position in training, and you will do the correct thing. It is absolutely insane. So that visualization, but visualizing the correct way is so important.
I want to get into a little bit of your social media also, because recently you got sponsored by Hyperfly. Congratulations with
I
that.
did. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
One of my favorite companies. But I saw something on your stories the other day. You had people asking you questions, and you were talking about how originally you didn't want to start an Instagram or anything like that, or like make content, and then you just found it fun. Like, and now you have like almost 100,000 followers on Instagram. How do you handle? 100,000 followers on Instagram is a lot, especially being a female, and you post like techniques and stuff like that. How do you handle the good and bad of social media?
Yeah. So I don't think it was so much that I didn't want to post content. I almost just didn't think that that there was a place for me. I was like a purple belt with super high level people. I'm like, people don't want to know what I have to say about this, but I love this, and the more I did it, the more I was like, okay, I do have some good stuff I can share. I've been competitive in a lot of areas of my life. It was a way for me to express myself when I couldn't compete. So it ended up being like super helpful just for me personally. As far as the good and the bads, man, honestly, I think it's just about having a healthy relationship with technology. A lot of my job requires me to, be coaching people on the computer or, posting content, and that can become a lot of screen time. And so I think honestly now the hardest part for me is having to balance, okay, we're going to put technology away, not going to be on my phone, or the feeling of needing to get back to people immediately. I think that can be hard. I think I've honestly kind of lucked out. I haven't really experienced too much like criticism or negativity. I've experienced some of that. I've had people comment on my body. I've had people call me fat. I've had people like just say not nice things, but it doesn't really affect me. I don't really care. So I'm like, hey, I don't even try to like prove myself. I'm like, if that's what you think, you are completely entitled to your opinion. So hey. So I think it really is just about like, again, maybe having a deep sense of confidence, having good people around me, and just having a healthy relationship with technology.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've never, the trolls or people wanting to say something on my content or whatever it is. I've been pretty lucky and haven't gotten too much either. But I'm like, look, dude, you're boosting me in the algorithm, because a comment's a comment. It doesn't matter. Like, you could sit there and say I'm the worst person in the world. I don't really care how much you hate my guest. Thanks for the comment. Thanks for the engagement. I appreciate that. And then two, it's like, who's really the one here that's the loser? I don't want to say loser, that's kind of harsh, but like, your comments, you're taking time out of your day to comment on someone's post
And like belittle them.
like it's so stupid to me. You know what I mean? I'm like
I agree.
it doesn't. But I have friends that do social media and they get one comment negative comment from, they see it's a black belt or something like that, that's like, oh man, that doesn't work that way, you shouldn't do that, and they're like, I got to take this post down. I'm like, what does it, it's the internet, bro. Relax.
Yeah, and the thing with jujitsu too is that like there are very few absolutely wrong things. There's a lot of ways to do a lot of things, you know? And so I do try to share really good quality stuff. I do try to believe, you know, in everything I post, and I do try to I care about the content I post. I care a lot. So at first it did hurt when I would get negative comments. But you know, you just have to, I like to say, listen to the haters, but don't necessarily believe them. Like, is there a way I could have done this better? But at the end of the day, believe in what I'm doing, be authentic with what I put out there. And then I really can't control other people's
Why
perceptions.
do you think you've been so successful at social media? Do you feel like it's your quality, it's your instruction, your personality?
I was hoping you could tell me. I don't, I don't know. Um, you know, I'm not really sure. I think maybe a little bit of all of that from what I've gathered from other people. And it's been so cool to hear people say that I've had a positive impact on them, a positive impact on their life, or that like I helped them keep going. That's truly all I want to do in this space is create a positive, supportive environment, because I do feel like there's a lot of places in jujitsu that, aren't so, you know, pretty. Um, and I want to keep it a positive thing. I want to keep it a healthy thing. And so I think I am very vulnerable and authentic. I try to share a lot of just myself, and I just try to be real. And I think sometimes it's nice when people can relate to who they see on the screen. You know, I compete. I'm not an elite competitor. I train with elite competitors, so I have that cool experience, right? But at the end of the day, I'm a brown belt who started jujitsu about 9 years ago, and some days I get smashed and some days I do really well and some days I win the tournament and some days I don't. And I'm a pretty normal person who has tried really, really hard to do extraordinary things with extraordinary people and just learn along the way. And so I think people maybe see themselves in me, is my theory, right? Because I'm not like a Fiona Davies or anything. Not even close, you know, like not even close. Like I would love to meet her and train with her, but I'm just a normal person who loves jujitsu and spends a lot of time dedicated to it.
Yeah. What do you feel like is, where do you feel like you need to improve the most in order to get that next belt, the your black belt?
Oh man, I mean, I don't see that coming for a little while. I just got my brown belt in December. Um, And I feel like lately I have been improving a lot. I know at the tail end of purple belt and all throughout brown belt, I've been really working on like my guard and my attacks and finding where I want to be from anywhere. And I think it's really just about kind of solidifying that and being able to do it um, pretty much on anyone, like get to my game on anyone. Maybe, but I feel like I'm so new at brown belt. It's like way too soon to even
Let me
think
enjoy this for a little bit.
about that. Yeah. I'm like, I'm still trying to grow into this one.
Yeah. So what do you have coming up for you then? What's coming down the pipeline? You mentioned you have a seminar and some other stuff coming up.
Yeah. So, in September, I'm going to be a part of the Alchemize Warrior Women's Weekend. And so, they were recently in San Diego. They had this huge kind of jujitsu retreat for women. Tons of women were out here, top level instructors. I mean, Hakel Canuto was out here. Bunch of cool people. Christina Barlin was out here. And so they bring high caliber jujitsu instructors. And this weekend, it's not only jujitsu, but it's also mindset. It's also nutrition. It's also training. So I'm going to be giving a talk there on confidence. So definitely, if you're listening to this and you are a female in jujitsu, check that out. That should be really cool. And then I have, you know, one-on-one performance training. I also am developing a group coaching system called the Grapplers Lab, which I'm really excited about, which kind of just introduces people to the basics of mindset, how to handle wins, how to handle losses. What does nutrition for jujitsu look like? What does strength training for nutrition look like? Just so you feel like you have a solid foundation in all these areas to kind of pursue your interests and pursue your passions.
Perfect. Well, I like to end every show with the same question. If you could give one advice to a brand new white belt, what would it be?
Oh, advice to a brand new white belt. One thing, um, I would say this would probably change every time I answer this question, but what came to me today is try the technique of the day every day. There's probably like more powerful things that I could say about like show up and whatever, whatever, whatever. But like honestly, try to find the technique of the day every day. And that would be my advice probably to a blue belt, a purple belt. Like
Something I
try
struggle
to
with.
find it. Yeah, yeah. Try to find that every day. Um, that's something I wish I did. I started doing that probably around blue or purple belt, and it made a huge difference.
Yeah, one of my buddies, he got promoted when he got promoted to purple. Our coach literally pointed that out. He said, "This guy tries the move of the day every class." He's like, "I see it." He's like, "That's a huge thing that you all need to focus on." And I was like, "Damn it,
Yeah. So many people are like, oh, I'm going to go doing to what I know I can do or what I'm comfortable doing. But like, that's such a good opportunity to just get out of that framework and try that, especially as a white belt when you don't even know what you like to do yet. So,
Right. Well, Rose, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This was a blast. Obviously, technical difficulties happen. It's it's all part of the game, but
yeah.
I want to thank you so much. Is if people want to follow you, where they can find you at?
Yeah. So you can find me at Rosie Rolls on Instagram. That's ROSIE ROLLZ. And also on my website where you can find out all the information on coaching, www.rosierolls.com.
Perfect. And what was your Hyperfly code if people want to support you?
Oh, yeah, thank you to Hyperfly. I love them. I loved them before I signed with them. I've been like a genuine fan of their stuff for so long. So super excited to be collaborated with them now. But use my code Rosie Rolls Fly.
Perfect. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Be sure to go follow Rose and enjoy all their content. It's fantastic. This conversation was great. I love all the mindset stuff. Like I'm like right now, I'm like, okay, there's so much more I need to think about when I think about mindset now. So I appreciate your time. And remember, go follow Rose. And thank you guys so much for listening and watching at home. Remember, no oil checks here. Peace.